Today's video will get good at Hearthstone Battlegrounds. An overview of what I'm going to be talking about is on screen now, but I'll just jump into it. First, we're going to talk about some general tips. Throughout an entire game of Battlegrounds, it is important to pay attention to who you are playing against and what comp they are going to be running. Knowing who you are up against and what they are doing is going to give you an idea of what you should do during your turns. It is important to keep in mind that there are always going to be unwinnable games. There is an RNG aspect to Battlegrounds that might give a player an unfair advantage. This is why you should accept this factor and focus on improving your chances to win each round. Don't forget that it is okay to take damage. Just because you lost 5 more rounds doesn't mean you are going to lose the entire game. There have been games where I got down to 1 or 2 health and ended up getting first place. In a lot of my games, I viewed my health as free space to tier up and get better minions to either set up or strengthen my composition. The last and most important tip is to always learn from your losses. In order to improve at Battlegrounds or any game, you have to think about your decisions and learn from them. If you don't pay attention to your mistakes, you will find yourself being hard stuck in your rating. Now before I go into the early game tips, it is important to know the different minion types. No, I don't mean the differences between Murlocs and Beasts, but more so a guideline that should help you in what minion to pick during each round. There are 4 different minion types in Battlegrounds that will help you in building tempo throughout the entire game. These types include stat, economy, gold, and synergy minions. Each type of minion should be prioritized based on what stage of the match you are in. For example, in the early game you should focus on buying either economy or stat minions. This is because gold and synergy minions are normally weak during the first few turns. I'm not saying you should ignore gold and synergy minions, it's just that the likelihood that either type will benefit you more than prioritizing in stats and economy is slim. On the other hand, during the late game you should focus on gold and synergy minions because they determine whether or not you win. Now that you have an idea on what minions to choose, we can move on to the early game. So, when you get into a game of Battlegrounds, the first thing you are able to do is select a hero. In this selection screen, you can also see what minion types are going to be available during this match. It is important that you play what you are comfortable with. If there are no heroes that you know how to play, then the best option is to choose a generally good hero. If you don't know which heroes are good, you can look up HS replays since they have a tier list showing all of the heroes and their win rates. In nearly every single game I play, I go through the same early game routine. This routine is my personal preference, but it seems to work almost every game. On turn 1, you buy a minion. On turn 2, you go up a tier. When I get to turn 3, there are usually a few options I can make. The first is to buy 2 minions if I bought an economy minion on turn 1. This is usually the option I take if I can. Another option you have is to use your hero power and buy a minion. Since you won't always get a hero where this is a viable option, you can always just buy a battlecry minion and sell it to then get a decent tier 2 minion. If you are super unlucky and had gotten no good minions on turn 1, then you can always sell your minions to hopefully buy 2 better ones. Although, I'd rather not do this because it might hurt your tempo. The last option is to buy and freeze if there is a potential for a triple or any kind of synergy, but I rarely do this because triples are normally weaker in the early game. On turn 4 I almost always buy 2 minions, and on turn 5 I always up to tier 3 and buy a minion. Turn 6 is where the mid game begins and where players start to formulate their strategies. The mid game is debatably the most impacting stage of every Battlegrounds match. This is where you need to challenge what decisions you make. Sometimes your comp pathing will be very easy and clear, but if it isn't, then you need to decide whether you should do a slow or fast push to tier 5. The easiest way to make this decision is knowing what endgame comps are strong and what the shop has given you. For example, some compositions core cards such as dragons require tier 6 cards like Caligos. So the fastest way to get to Caligos is to rush to tier 5 and get a gold main to increase the odds of getting a Caligos. On the other hand, some compositions don't require rush and build up over time such as Murlocs. The Murlocs endgame require mid-game cards such as Cold Light Seer and Felfim Navigator. If you get a good Murloc start, then you should slow climb and strengthen your comp. Okay, so how do we do a rush climb? Well, the easiest way to do this is to simply upgrade it every turn after turn 5. The only problem would be you'll be weaker during the mid game and will most likely take a lot of damage. In order to minimize the damage you take, I would sell minions to do a 2-for-1 trade in the shop. This is why economy minions are so important. If you have economy minions, then rushing is a lot easier. The other way to climb tiers is the slow or standard way. The way to do this type of climb is to simply wait an extra turn. So, instead of upgrading on turn 6, you would buy and refresh to strengthen your composition, and then upgrade on turn 7. Once again, you'd buy on turn 8 and upgrade on turn 9. Once you get to tier 5, that starts the late game. In the late game, your main goal is to either strengthen the comp you are already running or pivot to a different comp. Pivoting is when you aren't decided on a comp or get a really good roll on minions in the shop and decide to switch comps. Here's a really good example of when you should pivot. As you can see, the entire shop is filled with elementals. Not only is there one, but there are two core cards to the elemental build. Plus, there are three bonus elementals to enable that synergy. Recognizing when to pivot is an important skill to learn that just takes experience. Now we're going to talk about different endgame compositions. In every winning comp, there are always core cards. These core cards are what guide you into building that composition. Some example of core cards are Domo, Nomi, Low-Rag, and Gar for elementals, Razorgore, Caligos, and Adina for dragons, Baron and the Great Wolf for beast, Ripsnarl, Goliath, and Redeliza for pirates, and finally Lightfang or Mithrax for menagerie. If you find any of these cards during your run, you should consider building the complement cards for that core. Complement cards include any card that enables a core card. For example, Crackling Cyclone works well in an elemental build since a Rag, Domo, or Nomi can buff it really big. Another example is Parrot in a Baron Beast comp. The Parrot triggers the Wolf's Death Rattle, which keeps it alive for another proc. The Murloc comp is the one comp that has no cores. The endgame Murloc comp is full of cards that complemented each other over time. The Murloc composition requires a player to get either a Cold Light Seer or a Philofin Navigator to enable a group of Murlocs. Tribes like Mechs and Demons are somewhat weaker than the other tribes. In this recent patch though, a card called Big Fernal was added, enabling a possible Demon comp. These cards I mentioned aren't the only comps available. Different events will happen each match, so you'll never know what you'll get at the end of the game. The last thing I wanted to mention was the counter picks for each comp. I made this graph to try and show how each minion tribe scales. As you can see, comps like Elementals, Dragons, and Menagerie have better scaling in the second half of the matchup, while tribes like Beast, Pirates, and Demons have a stronger early game. This graph can't be accurately proven, but my point here is to show you an idea of the strengths and weaknesses of each minion tribe's scaling. This doesn't account for the RNG aspect, meaning that sometimes a player will scale extremely hard with the right rolls. For example, if I got Nomi on turn 6, that will give me an extreme advantage in an elemental build. The graph also doesn't account for each build's win condition. Each composition needs a condition that allows them to win. For example, Murlocs will beat Elementals late game if there are a ton of poison. Dragons will beat Murlocs if there's a Nadina. Sometimes the win condition is as simple as really big stats, but this is why counterpicking is important. If you think you're safe just because you have a really big taunt, then you'll be dumbfounded whenever someone plays a deadly spore first and destroys your taunt. Counterpicking will help you win and make you lose if you don't think about it. Poison counters big stats, Divine Shield counters poison. A good player will use this information to increase their odds of winning. This is why having a Cyclone in an elemental build is so strong. The Divine Shield enables it so that the Cyclone can tank the first hit, or even kill 2 or more minions before dying, increasing the odds of you winning that round. Anyways guys, that's all I have for this video. Let me know if you liked what you saw by leaving a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.